The chamber had been built for noise. 700 delegates, 12 atmospheric profiles, 31 translation streams layered into a constant hum that most species found reassuring. It was the sound of structure, of process, of a universe that had learned how to argue without tearing itself apart. Today it was silent. Not the polite quiet of procedure. Not the attentive quiet that comes before a verdict. This was the wrong kind of quiet. The kind that happens when something enters the room that nobody has a prepared response for. Commander Akaffer Briggs walked in alone. No escort detail. No advisory cluster. No data slate glowing with pre-approved talking points. Just a dark jacket, a paper notepad, and a pen she uncapped as she took her seat at the respondents' table. Several delegates leaned forward. Paper was not illegal. It was simply unnecessary. She wrote one line. Didn't look up. The senior counselor cleared his throats, 3 of them, sequentially, and the translation columns carried his voice across the chamber in perfect, emotionless clarity. Commander Briggs, Earth's United Nations Defense Force has been identified as operating 40,000 armed personnel within the Kepler frontier. This zone is restricted under the exclusion protocols. You are here to answer for this violation. The pause. A practiced one. The kind designed to invite apology. Briggs capped her pen. 40,000, she repeated. Then she turned the notepad around. Front row delegates leaned in first. Then the second row. Then the third as the number moved outward faster than sound. 280,000. And that, she said calmly, is the cleanup crew. The silence changed. It didn't break. It shifted. Before it had been waiting. Now it was calculating. A Verarac delegate's skin flushed from neutral blue to a strained, uneven green. 2 counselors began whispering to each other, too quietly for translation, their eyes fixed on the number like it might rearrange itself if they stared long enough. It didn't. The senior counselor spoke again, slower this time. 280,000, he said. You are stating this is the current force within the Kepler frontier. Current rotation, Briggs corrected. We cycle personnel. Extended deployments affect performance. We prefer to keep people sharp. A ripple moved through the chamber. Not loud, but wide. Earth's registered military contribution to Council operations, another delegate said, voice tight, is 14,000 personnel. Briggs nodded once. Correct. The beat. Those are deployed elsewhere. The chamber made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was what happened when hundreds of intelligent beings simultaneously realized they had been working with incomplete information. The senior counselor's posture shifted, just slightly. Commander, he said carefully, this council convened under the understanding that Earth had significantly expanded its military presence without notice or approval. We filed everything, Briggs said. No emphasis. No defensiveness. Just a statement. Every structure, every platform, every support system, all submitted through the appropriate channels, within required timeframes. That is not the issue, the counselor replied. It is exactly the issue, Briggs said. She leaned back slightly, folding her hands. The Kepler frontier has been under active Earth development for 11 years. If that development was not anticipated, that is a failure of oversight, not compliance. That silence again. Different this time. Sharper. A Dravathi counselor, secondary bench, voice like grinding stone, spoke without waiting to be recognized. You are telling this body, he said, that Earth constructed a military force of this scale inside a restricted zone and considers that lawful. Briggs met his gaze. We read the protocols, she said. The pause. Very carefully. No one spoke. Not immediately. Because this was the point where the room began doing something dangerous. It began checking. Numbers. Timelines. Filings. Possibilities. And the more they checked, the less comfortable the answers became. Briggs picked up her notepad again, as if the conversation had already concluded. I'd be happy to schedule a full documentation review, she said. Walk you through every submission. It's all there. She stood. No permission requested. I'm available all week. And then she walked out. No hesitation. No glance back. The chamber stayed silent for exactly 2 seconds after the doors closed. Then it exploded. Translation columns flared to life, overlapping languages colliding into a chaotic wall of sound as delegates spoke over each other, recalculating, reevaluating, trying to understand how something this large had existed this long without triggering a response. In the corridor, Lieutenant Owen Price pushed himself off the wall where he'd been waiting, falling into step beside her. "How bad?" he asked. Briggs glanced down at the notepad in her hand. The single line still sat at the top of the page. "They'll ask about 40,000. Tell them the real number." "Depends," she said. Behind them, the chamber still sounded like a structure under stress. "On what?" She closed the notepad. How fast they learned to count. They reached the viewport at the end of the corridor. The Kepler frontier stretched below them, a dark expanse threaded with precise lines of light. 11 years of infrastructure, layered carefully enough to look ordinary until you knew what you were looking at. Owen followed her gaze. "That all ours?" he asked quietly. Briggs didn't answer immediately. "Most of it," she said finally. He nodded once. Then after a moment, "And the rest?" She slipped the notepad into her jacket. "Still being built." E.S. Riva had spent his entire career believing that large mistakes announced themselves. That was the comforting theory. Civilizations collapsed loudly. Military buildups created detectable patterns. Strategic violations left residue, paper trails, anomalies, something an attentive analyst could isolate, classify, and report with confidence. That was the theory. On his 6th day embedded with the UNDF 7th Forward Battalion, he watched a human soldier carefully flip a piece of fried dough in a pan while arguing about tournament seating. 40 minutes before a contested zone patrol. Riva adjusted his grip on the notepad. He had switched to paper on day 2. Not because he preferred it. Because the humans noticed when he didn't. They always noticed. The mess bay was loud in a way that defied categorization. Not chaotic. Not disorganized. Just dense. Conversations overlapped without canceling each other out, like multiple currents flowing through the same space without interference. Private Donna Finch stood at the center of it, holding a metal utensil in one hand and pointing at a hand-drawn bracket pinned to the wall with the other. "I'm telling you," she said, "Webb only made it past quarterfinals because half the platoon's afraid of her." "I'm afraid of her," someone else replied. "That's different," Finch said. "That's survival instinct." Laughter. Real laughter. Riva looked at the bracket. It was drawn on the back of a supply manifest. Names, arrows, elimination lines. Structured. Organized. Maintained. The semi-final match was circled. Scheduled. He checked the time. 40 minutes. He wrote it down. Day 6. Pre-mission preparation includes structured cooking competition. Participation rate, high. Emotional investment, significant. He paused. Then added, "Grudges observed." "Sir, you're staring at it like it's classified," Finch said. Riva looked up. "I am attempting to understand its priority," he said. "It's the semi-finals," she replied, as if that explained everything. He considered this. "The patrol begins in 40 minutes, he said. "Yep. And this activity continues." "Also yep." Riva wrote that down too. Sergeant Carol Webb sat 3 meters away, eating something orange out of a container while reviewing a tactical map projected from her tablet. She did not look concerned. She did not look rushed. She looked prepared. Riva approached her. "Sergeant Webb," he said. She didn't look up. "Yeah. The unit deploys shortly." "Yep. The majority of personnel are engaged in this competition." "Semi-finals," she corrected. "Yes." The pause. "I want to confirm," Riva said carefully, "that this is standard procedure." That got her attention. She looked up at him, expression neutral but focused, like she was evaluating whether he was asking a serious question. "Finch makes good dough," she said. Riva waited. That appeared to be the entire answer. "I do not doubt the quality," he said, "but I am referring to operational readiness." Webb studied him for a second longer, then set the container aside. "You eat before a patrol," she said. Yes. You keep people fed, they think clearer. Blood sugar stays stable, decision-making stays sharp. She tapped the map once, zooming in on a sector line. A distracted soldier is a problem. A hungry soldier is a bigger one. Riva wrote quickly. Nutritional stability linked to combat performance. Cultural reinforcement via competition. Webb glanced at his notepad. You write everything down? I am an analyst. He hesitated, then added, I find it clarifying. She watched him for a moment with an expression he still hadn't fully categorized. Not skepticism. Not approval. Interest. You want to sit in on the briefing? She asked. Yes, he said immediately. The briefing room smelled like coffee. Riva had encountered the substance once already. The experience had been memorable. He remained near the wall, notepad ready. Lieutenant Aaron Cross stood at the front. No introduction. No formalities. He activated the display. Routes here, he said, tracing a line across the terrain map. Contact likely in Sector 3. Extraction points marked. Rules of engagement unchanged. 11 minutes. That was the total duration. Riva checked twice to confirm. In that time, Cross covered movement, contingencies, fallback positions, and communication protocols. No repetition. No elaboration beyond necessity. Questions? Cross asked. For all practical. All answered in under 60 seconds. Cross nodded once. Nobody gets shot, he said. The pause. I've got paperwork backed up and I'd really prefer not to add to it. The room laughed. Riva did not. He wrote it down. After the briefing, he located Finch again, who was now in a state of visible satisfaction and holding what appeared to be a winning entry from the semifinal. The lieutenant's closing statement, Riva said. Is that considered a motivational technique? Finch blinked. What, the paperwork thing? Yes. She thought about it. Yeah. Riva waited. No one wants to be the reason Cross has extra paperwork, she said. He wrote that down. Administrative inconvenience as behavioral deterrent. He paused. Is that effective? Finch looked at him like he had asked whether gravity was optional. Yeah, she said slowly. It works. The patrol deployed at 1400. Riva observed from the tactical operations room, where multiple data streams fed into a central display. The first anomaly appeared immediately. Communication density. The system flagged it as interference. Then corrected itself. It wasn't interference. It was volume. Channels opened continuously. Overlapping. Intersecting. Not structured. Not sequential. Simultaneous. Riva leaned closer to the display. Cross issued a movement order. At the same time, another voice commented on someone's equipment. A third responded. The unit repositioned perfectly. No delay. No confusion. The conversation continued underneath the maneuver like it had nothing to do with it. Riva stopped writing. Just watched. He had analyzed 14 military structures across multiple species. None operated like this. Dravathi units minimized communication. Precision through silence. Verarak relied on chemical signaling, efficient, controlled, unreadable. Human units. Constantly. About everything. Mission updates. Equipment. That's irrelevant details layered over critical instructions without degrading performance. At 1537, the patrol concluded. 0 casualties. For minor contacts. All resolved. The debrief lasted 8 minutes. Then someone said, Finals. The mess bay filled again. Riva remained in the observation room, staring at his notepad. He reviewed his entries. Competition before combat. Minimal briefing. Continuous communication. Flawless execution. He added a new line. There is no observable separation between informal behavior and operational effectiveness. He paused. Then, slowly wrote another. They do not become serious before conflict. They already are. He closed the notepad. Then, after a moment, he opened it again, because something still didn't fit. And for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure what he was looking at yet. The realization did not arrive all at once. Riva would later note that as the most unsettling part, there was no single moment where the pattern revealed itself cleanly, no clean break between misunderstanding and clarity. Instead, it accumulated, small observations stacking on top of each other until the weight of them became impossible to ignore. It began during the next patrol. Riva positioned himself in the operations room again, notepad open, already anticipating the same communication density. Voices layered instantly. Movement orders, confirmations, side conversations, everything happening at once. The same overlapping noise that had initially seemed inefficient and now simply seemed standard. The channels lit up. He tracked them more carefully this time. Channel 12, positional updates. Channel 7, environmental scan. Channel 19, someone commenting on the taste of field rations. The patrol entered the contested sector. Riva leaned forward. This was where other forces slowed down. Where communication tightened, simplified, reduced to essentials. The human channels did not change. If anything, they expanded. More voices joined. More threads opened. For a brief moment, Riva considered the possibility that this was chaos, that he had mistaken disorder for competence. Then the first contact occurred. 3 units engaged simultaneously. Not coordinated through a single command. Not sequenced. They simply arrived. Angles converging from different directions with timing that suggested planning, but no visible structure that explained how that planning had been executed. Riva checked the timestamps. The positioning had begun 11 minutes earlier. There had been no formal directive. No central command call. Only fragments of conversations spread across multiple channels, buried under unrelated discussion. And yet, the units moved as if they had been given the same order at the same time. The hostile position collapsed in under 5 minutes. Riva's pen stopped moving. He replayed the channel logs. Listened again. Filtered out non-essential noise. What remained still didn't make sense. Because there was no single instruction to isolate. The coordination existed across the entire system, not within it. Distributed. Understood without needing to be stated directly. He wrote slowly. They are not waiting for orders. He paused, then added, they are building them together in real time. The patrol continued. A second contact. More resistance this time. Terrain complications. Reduced visibility. Other forces would have paused. Reassessed. The humans adapted mid-movement. One voice noted a blockage. Another suggested an alternate route. A third confirmed timing. None of them outranked the others in a way that explained the decision-making authority. And yet the decision happened. Immediate. Executed without hesitation. Riva felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Not confusion. Something sharper. Recognition. He had been asking the wrong question. The question was not how they maintained order within chaos. The question was why the chaos wasn't disrupting them at all. Because to them, it wasn't chaos. It was context. At 15:42, the patrol ended. 0 casualties. Riva did not leave immediately. He remained in the operations room, reviewing the logs for a third time. Searching for something he could isolate, label, categorize. A system. A rule. A structure that explained what he had just seen. He found none. Only behavior. Consistent. Repeatable. Effective. He turned to a fresh page. His pen hovered there longer than usual. Then he wrote, I do not believe humans suppress fear. He stopped. Considered the statement. Modified nothing. Continued writing. I believe they experience fear fully and proceed anyway, as a matter of decision rather than instinct. He leaned back slightly. Read the line again. There were species that did not feel fear. Riva had studied them. They were predictable. Their responses could be modeled, anticipated, countered. This was different. This was a system that acknowledged fear and ignored its authority. He added one more sentence. A being that does not feel fear is dangerous in a known way. A being that feels it and continues regardless has no reliable limit. Riva stared at the page. For the first time since his assignment began, he understood the problem. Not the logistics. Not the numbers. The nature of the thing itself. He closed the notepad slowly. Outside, the mess bay had already filled again. Voices overlapping. Laughter. Someone arguing about the results of the finals. Life continuing at full volume, as if nothing significant had happened. As if what he had just witnessed required no adjustment. Riva stood. Walked toward the sound. He found Finch at a table, surrounded by others, holding what appeared to be another winning entry. "You won again," he said. "Obviously," she replied. He studied her for a moment. This individual had participated in a competitive cooking event minutes before entering a contested zone. Had maintained an ongoing conversation during active engagement. Had executed her role without error. No. Was entirely focused on something else. "How do you determine priority?" Riva asked. Finch blinked at him. "What do you mean?" "In situations involving multiple simultaneous demands," he clarified, "how do you decide what matters most?" She thought about it. "Not long." "I don't," she said. Riva waited. "I just do the next thing," she added. "Then the next one after that." He wrote that down immediately. Sequential focus within parallel systems. He paused. That approach appears to disregard long-term risk analysis. Finch shrugged. "Maybe." A small smile. "But it gets the job done." Riva looked at the notepad. Then back at her. Then back at the notepad again. For a moment, he considered crossing out the earlier lines. Revising them. Making them fit within a framework he understood. He didn't. Instead, he turned to a new page. And wrote a single sentence. "My superiors were wrong about the likely explanation." He closed the notepad. This time, he did not reopen it. Because for the first time, he wasn't collecting data anymore. He was adjusting conclusions. Counselor Petich had built his reputation on finding what others missed. Not through brilliance. Through patience. 8,000 documents reviewed across 22 years of service. 31 confirmed violations, each one uncovered not because it was hidden well, but because it had been hidden just well enough to pass a less attentive eye. He did not rush. He did not assume. He read. That was why he had been assigned Earth's Kepler frontier filings. Find the violation. 3 days, they had told him. It took 6. On the 6th day, he sat across from Commander Briggs with a data chip in his hand and the distinct sensation that something fundamental had shifted without his permission. "I will walk you through it," he said. Briggs nodded once. "I assumed you would." PTH activated the display. The first document appeared. "January 2031, he said. "Form 12. Civic Infrastructure Declaration." Briggs said nothing. "It describes a medical facility, an educational institution, agricultural processing units, and water reclamation systems." "Correct," Briggs said. PTH zoomed in. PTH exhaled slowly. Because this was the problem. There was no discrepancy. No mislabeling. No falsified data. Every document described exactly what it claimed to describe. A school. A hospital. A transport hub. A communication grid. Infrastructure. Civilian. Functional. And yet, when assembled together, it was something else. "You did not hide it," Peter said. "No," Briggs replied. "You described it differently. We described it accurately." PTH leaned forward, hands clasped. "You constructed a military presence of significant scale inside a restricted zone," he said, choosing each word carefully, by filing it as civilian development. "We constructed a civilian settlement," Briggs said. "The military presence supports it." The distinction sat between them. Thin. Precise. Legally intact. Pete closed his eyes briefly. Opened them again. Moved to the final document. It was older. Not a filing. An internal memo. Dated 6 weeks after the Exclusion Act had passed. He read it once. Then again. 3 sentences. That was all it took. "The Act closes every legitimate channel," he read aloud. "Fine. We will use the channels that remain." Silence. PTH lowered the display. "This was written 6 weeks after the legislation," he said. "Yes." By the same individual who initiated the first filing. Yes. He looked at her. Really looked this time. Not as a respondent. Not as a variable in a system. As the origin point. You planned this, he said. Briggs didn't answer immediately. Because the answer was already there. In the documents. In the timeline. In the execution. I recognized an opportunity, she said. Peach let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh in another context. You recognized a loophole. I recognized a pathway. He studied her for a long moment. Then nodded once. Because arguing semantics would not change the outcome. There is no violation, he said. No. Not in the filings. No. Not in the infrastructure. No. Peach leaned back. For the first time in 6 days, he allowed himself to stop searching. Because there was nothing left to find. Only something to understand. You built a system, he said slowly, that is indistinguishable from compliance. Briggs tilted her head slightly. It is compliance. Peach almost smiled. Almost. He powered down the display. Sat in silence for a moment longer. Then placed the data chip on the desk between them. I will submit my findings, he said. I appreciate your thoroughness, Briggs replied. He stood. Paused at the door. There was one question left. Not for the report. Not for the council. For himself. Did you know it would work? He asked. Briggs considered that. Not the question. The memory behind it. I knew it hadn't been done before, she said. PTH nodded. That was answer enough. He stepped into the corridor. Stopped again. Didn't turn around. The school, he said. From the first filing. Yes. Is it functional? There was the smallest pause. Top ranked in the frontier sector, Briggs said. We're very proud of it. Peach stood there for a second longer. Then left. Inside the office, Briggs opened her notepad. A fresh page. She wrote slowly. They checked everything. The pause. They found nothing. Another pause. She closed the notepad. Because the next step was already in motion. The council would not accept this quietly. They would test it. Measure it. Stress it until it broke. Or proved that it wouldn't. Briggs stood. Straightened her jacket. And began preparing for the demonstration she had been expecting for the last 3 years. Because systems like this didn't end with discovery. They ended with proof. The council did not call it a test. They called it a capability assessment under standardized tactical conditions, which allowed everyone involved to pretend it was something more neutral than it was. It wasn't. It was a question. And the question was simple. Are you as dangerous as this looks? 70 observers filled the gallery. Analysts, delegates, advisors who had insisted on attending in person rather than relying on relay feeds. That alone said enough. Curiosity had shifted into something heavier. Riva took his seat with his notepad already open. He had learned. Across the chamber, Counselor Death stood at the railing, unmoving, his attention fixed on the display with a stillness that suggested focus rather than calm. Commander Briggs was not in the front row. Riva noticed that immediately. She stood at the back, near the wall, where she could see the observers instead of the simulation. Watching them. Not the outcome. The reaction. Riva wrote that down. Confidence precedes observation of others, not self. The scenario initialized. 3-front engagement. Reinforced positions on 2 axes. Supply degradation built into the 3rd. Riva recognized the structure instantly. It was designed to force a slowdown. To create friction. To expose limits. The UNDF deployed the 40th Battalion. The display lit up. Signal threads appeared across the interface, each channel represented as a colored line. Riva leaned forward. In a standard operation, there would be 4. Command. Response. Flank. Emergency. The 40th opened with 47. In the first 3 minutes. The display didn't look organized. It looked saturated. Threads crossing, looping, intersecting. Too many to track individually. Riva didn't try. He had already made that mistake once. Instead, he watched the movement. At 8:11, the first engagement began. Riva expected a build-up. Positioning. Command synchronization. There was none. Or rather, there was, but not in a way the system could isolate. 3 separate elements reached 3 separate points of vulnerability at the same time. Not seconds apart. Simultaneous. The position failed before it could respond. Riva checked the log. The coordination had formed over 11 minutes of conversation. No single directive. No centralized order. Just fragments. Timing references. Movement notes. Small adjustments layered across multiple channels until they aligned into something precise. He wrote without looking away. They do not operate sequentially. Behind him, someone made a quiet sound. Not speech. Recognition. The second front held longer. Reinforced structure. Overlapping coverage. And the supply degradation activated. Riva knew what should happen next. The unit should slow. Recess. Redistribute resources through command channels. Instead, Channel 14 lit up. Sergeant Webb. Her voice cut through the noise with absolute clarity, not because it was louder, but because everything around it adjusted without being told to. Shift load, she said. 2 to 6, 6 to 3. Keep moving. No explanation. No justification. Just a statement. Riva watched as 6 personnel adjusted their distribution mid-movement, redistributing equipment in motion without breaking formation. The supply deficit didn't disappear. It diluted. Spread thin enough that no single unit was compromised. All of it happened in under 90 seconds. And underneath it, the other channels continued. A discussion about equipment packing. A disagreement about a card game debt. Someone asking if the finals had been rescheduled. Riva felt something tighten in his chest. Not confusion. Not anymore. Understanding. He wrote again. They solve problems the way they communicate, simultaneously. The second front collapsed at 8:49. 38 minutes. The projection had been 70. Riva glanced toward Counselor Death. The Dravathi's hands were gripping the railing. Tightly. Riva marked the time. First visible loss of composure. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was why. Death was not reacting to the performance. He was reacting to the implication. Riva wrote it carefully. He is not afraid of what they can do. He is afraid of what he misunderstood. The third front initialized. This was where the scenario designers had placed their confidence. Extended movement. Reduced supply. Terrain disadvantage. A forced engagement designed to punish exactly the kind of system the 40th appeared to be running. At 8:51, 2 minutes after the second front fell, a voice came across the command channel. Lieutenant Cross. 4 words. No emphasis. No urgency. Let's finish this. Riva wrote them down immediately. Because he understood, now, that the words themselves were not the point. The tone was. It was not a command issued under pressure. It was the tone of someone completing a task that had already been decided. The third front collapsed at 9:02. 11 minutes. Total elapsed time. 51. The projection had been 140. The display stabilized. All 3 fronts cleared. All units accounted for. Operational readiness intact. The gallery was silent. Not the earlier silence. Not confusion. Not calculation. This was something else. Riva looked down at his notepad. Then back at the display. Then, slowly, he turned to the delegate seated beside him. A junior analyst. Bryn. What were they saying? Bryn asked quietly. Riva had been expecting the question. He scrolled through the logs. Filtered. Reviewed. Tactical coordination, he said. Position updates. Supply adjustments. Bryn nodded. And the other channels? Riva paused. Scrolled further. Channel 14 maintained an ongoing discussion regarding a card game debt, he said. Bryn blinked. During the engagement? Yes. Riva continued. Channel 31 resolved an equipment packing error through field improvisation. The pause. Channel 44 was used by Private Finch to discuss preparation for a cooking competition. Bryn stared at him. For the finals, Riva added. Silence. Bryn looked back at the display. 51 minutes, he said. Yes. They beat the model by almost half. Yes. Another pause. Are they always like this? Riva considered the question. The bracket. The patrol. The conversations layered over execution. The absence of transition between ordinary behavior and extreme performance. Yes, he said. Brain stopped writing. For the first time since the simulation began, he simply looked. From the back of the gallery, Riva felt it rather than saw it. The stillness. Commander Briggs had not moved. Because she already knew. This was not a reveal for her. This was confirmation for everyone else. Riva turned back to his notepad. There was one more entry he had not yet written. He hesitated. Because it did not fit within standard reporting categories. Not logistics. Not tactics. Not capability. Something else. He wrote it anyway. The 40th Battalion was destroyed 3 years ago. He paused. Then continued. This unit is composed entirely of volunteers who requested the designation. A final line. Their petition contained one sentence, "We will carry it." Riva stared at the words. Then closed the notepad. Because he did not yet have a framework for what that meant. Only the certainty that it mattered. The chamber was full before the session was called to order. That alone would have been enough to mark the shift. Delegates who had sent assistance the first time were present in person now. Observers without direct stake in the Kepler frontier had requested access and been granted it. Even the upper benches, rarely occupied during open hearings, held figures Riva had only seen in closed sessions. Everyone had read the files. Everyone had seen the demonstration. And everyone had come to hear the same thing. What happens now? Commander Briggs entered exactly as she had before. Alone. Notepad in hand. No visible change in posture, expression, or pace. Riva watched the room react. Not outwardly, but subtly. Space adjusted. Attention narrowed. Expectation sharpened. The senior counselor opened the session, his voice steady, formal, controlled. Routine. Riva barely heard the words. Because he was watching something else. The difference between this room and the last one. Before, they had been waiting for an explanation. They were waiting for a decision. Counselor PTH read his findings into the record. Precise. Final. All filings submitted by Earth within the Kepler frontier are in full compliance with the expansion limitation framework, he said. No violations have been identified across Form 12 declarations, infrastructure protocols, or associated annexes. The words landed. Not heavily, but firmly, because they left no space for reinterpretation. The chamber didn't react immediately, but the silence tightened. Riva felt it. Pressure without release. Then Counselor Death spoke. He had remained silent through the entire report. Through the demonstration summary. Through everything. Now he leaned forward slightly. Not enough to signal aggression. Enough to signal intent. Commander Briggs, he said. His voice was unchanged. Measured. Gravel layered over control. I will ask a question not entered into the formal record. The pause. I will ask it here, in full view of this chamber. Riva stopped writing. Because something in the tone had shifted. This wasn't procedure. This was something else. What are you? Death asked. The room stilled completely. Not confusion. Not surprise. Focus. He continued, refining the question as he spoke. Not your government. Not your military. Not your filings or your numbers. A slight tilt of the head. You. Silence. What are you, he repeated, and what do you want? A longer pause. And if this council votes to oppose your presence in the Kepler frontier, what will you do? Riva felt the weight of the question settle. It wasn't just one question. It was 3. Identity. Intent. Response. Briggs didn't answer immediately. Not because she hesitated. Because she chose the timing. Riva had seen that before. Control through pacing. She set her pen down on the notepad. Looked directly at Death. And spoke. Earth has been at war with itself for most of its history, she said. No emphasis. No dramatics. Just a statement. Not small conflicts. Not isolated incidents. Sustained, structured, industrial-scale war. The chamber remained silent. Listening. We studied it, she continued. We built sciences around it, philosophies to justify it, systems to sustain it. The pause. We were very good at it. Riva wrote that down. Carefully. Because this was not background. This was context. We did not stop because we became peaceful, Briggs said. A subtle shift in the room. Expectation adjusting again. We stopped because we found something larger. She gestured slightly, not outward but upward. The problem of the stars. Expansion. Survival beyond a single system. Another pause. That required cooperation. Riva could feel where this was going. And so could everyone else. The Exclusion Act, Briggs said, closed those cooperative pathways. Her gaze didn't leave deaf. It was not an accident. It was written to limit our expansion while maintaining procedural legitimacy. No denial came. None was expected. It did not change what we are, she said. The beat. It focused it. Silence. Intent. When you remove the options a system is willing to use, Briggs continued, you are left with the ones it is not willing to abandon. Riva felt something settle into place. The final piece. We were not willing to stop building, she said. Not willing to stop expanding. Not willing to accept a boundary defined by others as permanent. Each sentence landed cleanly. No force behind it. No need. So we read the act, she said. A small movement. She picked up her pen. Very carefully. Riva's eyes shifted to the notepad in her hand. He knew what was coming. She wrote one line. Turned the page. Placed it flat on the table. Even from where he sat, he could see it. We are still here. We always will be. No one spoke. Because there was nothing to interrupt. No space left for argument in that moment. Death looked at the words. Then back at her. And if we oppose you? He asked. Briggs didn't look at the chamber. Didn't look at the other delegates. Only at him. Then you will be opposing the presence of 280,000 people, she said, who have spent 11 years building schools, hospitals, and infrastructure in a region you declared closed. The pause. And you will need to explain that decision to every other species watching this session. Riva felt it. The shift. Not emotional. Strategic. The scope expanding beyond the room. The ones who have been watching the Kepler frontier develop, Briggs continued. The ones who believed, correctly, that the system might open for them as well. Silence. But not empty. Calculating. Riva glanced at Pete H. The counselor spoke quietly. Almost to himself. The school is top-ranked, he said. No one responded. But it landed. Riva knew it had. Because it reframed the entire argument in a single detail. Not military presence. Civilian reality. The vote was called. Procedure took 11 minutes. Structured. Orderly. Controlled. Riva didn't write during it. He watched. Counted. Waited. The result appeared. 17 in favor. For abstentions. 2 opposed. And 1 other. Riva wrote the numbers down. Not for the report. For himself. Because numbers mattered. And this one meant something had changed. The chamber began to empty. Not slowly. Not quickly. Efficiently. Like a system recalibrating and moving on. Briggs remained seated for a moment longer. Not in triumph. Not in relief. Still, as if finishing something that had started long before anyone else in the room had been aware of it. Riva stood. Moved toward her. He had one question. He had been holding it since the demonstration. Since the field observation. Since the moment he realized he did not have a category for what he was seeing. He stopped beside her. Do they know? He asked. She looked up. The 40th, he clarified. Your soldiers. The pause. Do they know what they are? Riva watched her consider it. Not the question. The people behind it. The bracket. The conversations. The execution. The volunteers who had chosen a name. They know they're annoyed, she said. Riva blinked. That wasn't. She continued. That's usually enough. He wrote it down. Carefully. Because he understood now that meaning, with humans, was often compressed. Then he closed the notepad. Nodded once. And stepped back. Because the answer, like everything else in this process, was simple and far more complicated than it appeared. The corridor outside the chamber was wide enough to accommodate 3 separate transit lanes. It was designed that way to prevent congestion after high-attendance sessions. It had never accounted for hesitation. As Commander Briggs stepped out, the flow adjusted. Not dramatically. Not in a way that could be formally noted or cited in a report. But enough. Delegates moved aside a fraction earlier than necessary. Conversations paused half a second longer than they should have. Paths cleared with a subtle efficiency that suggested something had been recalculated beneath the surface. Riva followed at a distance. Not close enough to intrude. Close enough to observe. He had spent his career studying systems, political, military, social. The small shifts interested him more than the large ones. Large shifts were obvious. Predictable in hindsight. Small ones were where the real changes lived. This was a small one. And it was happening everywhere. A Verarak delegate altered course before crossing Briggs' path, skin tone holding steady but posture angled just slightly away. 2 Dravathi aides lowered their voices as she passed, not out of secrecy, but out of recognition. A junior analyst stepped aside entirely, as if unsure of the correct distance to maintain and choosing caution over precision. No one acknowledged it. No one needed to. Riva wrote as he walked. Social spacing adjusted without directive. Recognition precedes protocol. Ahead, Lieutenant Owen Price pushed off from the wall where he had been waiting, falling into step beside Briggs with the ease of familiarity. Riva slowed. Let the distance widen. He could still hear them. How bad? Owen asked. 17, Briggs said. Owen nodded once. And the rest? For didn't want to decide, she said. 2 couldn't. Owen let out a quiet breath. Death? Yes. A short pause. He'll push again. Yes. No concern in her voice. Not dismissal. Acknowledgement. Riva wrote that down too. Opposition expected. No behavioral shift. They reached the viewport. The Kepler frontier stretched below, a band of structured light cutting through dark space. From this distance, it looked almost delicate. Riva knew better. He had seen the layers, the filings, the construction hidden inside ordinary language. 11 years of intent. Owen folded his arms, looking out. Still feels strange, he said. What does? Briggs asked. That it worked. Briggs didn't answer immediately. Riva watched her reflection in the glass. Not pride. Not relief. Assessment. It didn't work, she said finally. Owen glanced at her. It held. A small distinction. But Riva understood it immediately. Worked implied completion. Held implied continuation. He wrote it down. The system is not finished. It is ongoing. Owen nodded slowly. Next phase? He asked. Briggs reached into her jacket. Pulled out the notepad. Flipped to a fresh page. Riva leaned slightly, not enough to be noticed, just enough to see the motion of her pen. One of them already started, she said. Owen smiled faintly. Of course it did. They stood there for a moment longer, looking out at the frontier. Then they turned and continued down the corridor. Riva did not follow this time. He remained at the viewport, watched the lights, considered everything he had recorded, everything he had revised. He opened his notepad again. Read the earlier entries. Communication. Structure without structure. Then he turned to the last page. Added one more line. They do not wait for permission to become what they already are. He closed the notepad. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Because the question he had been assigned to answer, threat or misunderstanding, no longer applied. It had been the wrong question from the beginning. The correct question, he realized, was much simpler. What happens when something that does not stop is finally noticed? Riva looked out at the Kepler frontier one last time, then turned. Because reports needed to be filed. And this one would not be ignored.